And joining us here to provide more perspective is CCTV's Jim Spellman. And Jim, first, for people living in Hong Kong, how different is life from before 1997 under British rule?
Well, in some ways, it's really not so different. The handover agreement was designed to maintain the lifestyle and the business environment of Hong Kong with a large degree of autonomy over internal affairs. So they have a capitalist economy. The legal system there is based on English common law, and many of the individual freedoms remain the same. The big difference is in government, and specifically the role of the chief executive, the focus of all these protests. Protesters seem to want neither the current one country, two systems setup, nor the previous colonial British rule, but rather almost an American-style direct democracy. It's not how the agreement works, and the Basic Law makes it clear that only the National People's Congress can change the Basic Law. That's really the dynamic that is at play here with the protesters.
And Jim, I want to play some video from 1997 at that handover ceremony from British to Chinese rule. Let's take a look at that. Now you see the British flags coming down there. This begs the question, why did Britain hand over control to China in the first place?
So much history there, and it dates back to the late 1800s. The British actually leased Hong Kong from the Chinese. There was a 99-year lease that was set to expire in 1997. So there needed to be some way to move forward, a new arrangement. By the 1980s, Hong Kong had become an important business hub in Asia. China wanted Hong Kong back. As the deadline for handover drew closer, these businesses were facing a lot of concern about whether they could continue to operate if Hong Kong became part of China again and was under the socialist system that China has. So negotiations began. Ultimately, they arrived at this one country, two systems approach. It's really hard to encapsulate all of this. There's a lot more to it as well. But really, I think understanding the basic law that this agreement was built on is key to understanding the dynamic going on with these protesters and, in a way, the limited options that the government has and why the protesters are turning to civil disobedience. Because really, in this basic law, the whole nature of this agreement just simply doesn't allow for the kind of direct voting, choosing of candidates that they want.
And for more discussions on the Hong Kong protests, I spoke to Martin Jacques. He's the author of When China Rules the World, The End of the Western World and the Birth of a New Global Order.
I think finally the talks are happening. I think the mood music surrounding the talks, certainly from the Hong Kong government side, I think has been pretty positive, actually. You know, we're here to listen. C.Y. Leung said something like, we're all ears. We want to hear what the students think about the situation and so on, and what they think about the situation in Hong Kong. You know, that seems to me to strike exactly the right kind of note.
In an interview with a small group of foreign media after the talks, the chief executive was asked why the selection process is necessary. He talked about the need to not have any particular group of people dominate the election process. He said this in quotes, if it's entirely a numbers game and numeric representation, then obviously you'd be talking to half of the people in Hong Kong who earn less than $1,800 a month. He did say, though, that there is perhaps some room for a compromise. So as of now, how representative of the entire population is the nomination committee?
Well, obviously he's talking about the nominating committee. He's not talking about those who are going to vote because it's universal suffrage. And I think this is an important question, actually, because one of the criticisms that's being made by some of the protesters, not just the students, but other protesters as well, is that, you know, Hong Kong doesn't represent a very large slice of the population. It over-represents the sort of tycoons who've dominated Hong Kong economic and indeed political life and so on. Now, I don't know what the new nominating committee is likely to be. I mean, I know what it is now, but it's due to be finalized, I understand, in November. And I think there is here some serious room for discussion and opening out the nominating committee to a wider cross-section of Hong Kong people. Or rather, put it another way, so that those who've been much less fortunate economically in Hong Kong get greater representation.
Some argue this protest is more about inequality rather than democracy. What's your take on it?
Look, I think that the question of the election has been the lightning conductor for a range of grievances amongst people in Hong Kong. I don't think the majority of the population in Hong Kong are against the electoral process, but clearly a minority are. But what they're troubled about is what they see has been happening in Hong Kong. You know, they're very unhappy about the housing situation. And the housing situation in Hong Kong is ridiculous. Because what's happened is basically four families control the property building in Hong Kong. And each year they allow only 4%, rephrase that. Only 4% of Hong Kong, the area of Hong Kong, is used for residential use. So the problem of Hong Kong property is not the lack of space in Hong Kong, it is the lack of supply of land to build on. Now, you know, what that's has meant is basically now most of Hong Kong young people are priced out of the market and will never be able to afford property. Now, that is a serious grievance. And so they're thinking, well, how can we get something done about this? Likewise, as you probably are aware, I mean, Hong Kong has always been a very unequal society. It's not just happened since 1997. Long before then, 10% of the rich control 77% of the wealth of Hong Kong. So these are really important grievances, I think, which lie behind it.
All right, Martin, Jacques, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.